Okay, I've got my solution open. I've switched over from control flow to the data flow tab up here. Now, I will say this, I generally don't do it that way. I think most SSIS folks probably don't, because you see this data flow task, I think I said it at the beginning of either the last video or the previous one, is you are going to spend so much time there. Well, if you double click on it, notice it automatically flips you into the data flow task, and it puts you into that data flow task. Now that may not make much sense, right? So control flow, bring my toolbox into play. Let me take you out. And watch, I can have multiple data flows. Okay? So like if we're loading a data warehouse, I might have load Oracle, load SQL Server, load Excel. And you might have some sort of a precedent set between these as well, like this happens, and then when that one's finished, this happens, and etc. And then I'll delete that one. Here's what you see, the data flow. If I flip to the data flow tab, notice I can take a look at the data flow for each one of these. Now it just happens that they all are empty, but if I double click on it, then it pops me right into the same tab, except for it puts the focus on the correct data flow task that I'm working with. So it doesn't make any difference. Nobody's going to think of you any better or differently or worse if you do it this way versus clicking on the data flow tab. But that's all the data flow tab is. It is for editing what's going down inside your data flow tasks. Okay, that's all there is to it. Now, I'm going to go back actually and remove these. These are extraneous, don't really need them. And I don't even need the emails here. So notice that I can delete all at once, or I can kind of drag around here and I can delete this way. And I'm left simply with the sole data flow task. Okay. So now I'm going to double click on my SQL Server here. Actually, and I'm actually going to call this one Export SQL Server to .text. Okay. To text. SQL Server to text. What happened? The reason I got that error message, it did not like the period. So when I said .txt, it did not like that in the name that I set up. It's a reserved character. If you want to resize it, feel free to do so. That's what these little corner things are for here. And you can manipulate it. Now, if we were doing this inside of the editor all by ourselves, we'd go to the data flow and we would do something like this. But I want to compare and contrast the wizard, what we saw in the wizard, to what we're going to see here in the data flow. So bear with me. I'm going to go through this very quickly, and I'm going to go back and I'm going to run the wizard, and we're going to basically do the same thing. We're going to export from SQL Server to text in the wizard as well as here in the package. Now I'm actually going to go through the wizard fast. So if this is something that kind of mystifies you and you are a little confused, why is he going so quick? I don't understand. I don't like this. All right, well, then you need to go back and watch those videos on the wizard. So I'm going to use the From Excel SQL Server, and I'm going to export to a flat file. And my flat file, I will just put at the root of the C drive, and we'll call this courses.txt, CSV, whatever you want. I'll call it text. I'd like it to be delimited. I don't want anything around the text. What it's asking me, oh, you can't see this, right? It's asking me for this text qualifier, and excuse me, on the next page of this wizard we'll be asked, do you want a separator? Like, do you want commas between the column names? Do you want pipes? What do you want? Well, if I choose commas, then how am I going to deal with a data element that already has commas in it? That's going to be confusing. So a lot of times you will put double quotes around text so that if there is a comma in the text, it doesn't mess up your data import. I won't do it this time. I don't think that I have any commas, so it's not going to matter. I would like column names in the first row, please. So I'm creating the destination, right? So then I want to copy the data from the course table, and I want it separated with a comma. So what it's going to do, this CRLF is a control line feed, and that basically means that each row is going to be on a separate line. So every row gets a separate line in the text field. At the end of the row, it's going to put the new line and create the new line. The column is delimited by a comma. Now under the mappings, I could choose, I want to actually ignore this one, so it would not create a course ID column in the destination. But I actually do want that to be created. So there's going to be 3 columns, course ID, title, and how about this? Just to show you we can do it, in the destination, we want it to be called author instead of instructor. We say OK. You could preview if you want. But we say next, next, finish, and it dumps out 3 rows. It created our text file, courses.txt, that we can go look at and actually see that is exactly what it did. It put the commas as a column separator. Each row got its own separate line. Probably nothing that huge to you, but it does show you how to export a text file. Now I want to show you how to do the exact same thing, just here natively within the package. It is not that difficult. So I'm going to go to this one, and I will say this. Let me lead with this. Don't get so hung up if you try this at home and it doesn't work. I'm going at a very high level here. We are going to have much more detail and a solid breakdown of using the data flow task later on in the course. So if something goes wrong and you're unsure how to fix it, don't worry about it. Just say, gosh, I wish it had worked like it did for Scott, and then move on to the next video. Don't get sidetracked right now with unnecessary details. Try to make it work. If it doesn't work, that's cool. Okay, well, let's actually make this thing tick. Now, I want you to pay close attention to a couple of things here. Number one is what happens in this environment when I switch to control flow and data flow. So control flow over here, data flow up here. You can see the toolbox change. Okay, Connections Manager is not really so much, but the control flow toolbox is all about containers and tasks. Whereas when I flip over to the data flow, then the toolbox is more about sources and destinations and transformations. Okay. So I'm going to skip the discussion of transformations. We'll talk that in chapter 4. Right now, remember, we're just trying to create our first data flow item. So let's think back. We did it in the wizard. We went from SQL Server to text. So let's do the same thing. Let's over in the data flow sources, all we got to do, we got to just simply find SQL Server and drag and drop, right? Uh-oh. I don't see a SQL Server, do you? They've made it a little confusing for us. If you just want a pure SQL Server 2008, 2005 SQL Server, then you're going to want to go with your OLADB source. That's right there. Okay, so that's the one. I could use a ADO.NET source as well, but I'm going to choose the native OLADB source. Now my destination, it's pretty clear. I'm going to choose the flat file. Okay, again, I'm just trying to mimic what we did in the wizard. So I'm just going to grab the flat file. Now both of these have the red for the exact same reason. Let's move this in. You can see this term Connection Manager. And it says that for both of them, neither one of them have a Connection Manager yet. Now we in SSIS will work with Connection Managers. You can see that's what this bottom part down here is all about. Let me just move that up so that we can focus on this a little bit more. So you might have dozens of connection managers down here. These connection managers can be reused with other tasks, with other data flow tasks, but it provides you a reusable place to store all of the connections that a package needs. So I can come down here and I could make a new flat file connection directly here, and then I could go to my flat file destination and I would be able to choose, and I should have chosen the source, but I'd be able to choose that. Because I have no connection managers, when I double click on the source, there's nothing here. This is empty because this is empty for an OLADB set of connection managers. So watch, I could just do this. This is the easy way to just get this done the first time. Double click, click the new button. And I have a previous connection manager from working in this environment in a previous solution. And so I'm going to say new. And you notice up at the top, I have the choice now of these native OLADB providers to choose. And we're back at that same choice we had between, do I use OLADB for SQL Server or do I use the SQL Server native client 10.0? Well, if I'm given the choice, I want to choose the native client because it's going to be the fastest option for me. It's going to give me the most flexibility. So I choose that. I type in the name of my server, or you can drop down and choose your server in that way. Choose the source database that I want to use and how I want SSIS to connect at runtime. You can test your connection if you're a little bit leery. I will give you a little bit of hint. If you're able to see the databases in the drop down, then you have successfully passed authentication here. I'm going to avoid for the time being talking about SQL Server authentication. When we get into Chapter 3, we're going to talk about how packages do encryption, and we'll come back and discuss that. There are a couple of things that you'll need to be aware of. A little bit about this particular screen here. You notice the provider is SQL Native Client 10.1. So that's what that means, SQL Native Client. And I say OK. And if we I don't think I can. If I can get that out of the way without actually doing too much, you can see down in the connection managers that it has now saved that particular connection. And that means that we could have other sources in other tasks that could reuse that particular connection manager. Now, bring this back over. Do you remember how in the wizard we were asked to choose either a table or a view or to write a query? Same thing right here. Do you want to choose a table or a view, or do you want to write a query? All right, well, I've just got simply a table, and the table I want is dbo.course. So this is now going to be our source. Not quite finished. We have at least one final step here, and that is to define which columns we would like to make available. Okay, up here, you could say I don't want any columns, or I want just the course ID and the instructor. Okay. Talk about output columns a little bit later. But I now have gotten rid of the red with the white X. And I know that some of you are probably watching this knowing that I could go over here and start doing some transformations. But for the time being, I'm just going to do this. I'm going to say I'm going to go from SQL Server to my flat file. And so I'm double clicking on my flat file. Now, by the way, I'm going to delete this. Excuse me. If you happen to double click on your flat file without having it connected either to a transformation or a source, you're going to see this message, there are no available input columns. Okay, generally speaking, you don't want to edit this. You instead want to do this and then double click on it and you get a different screen. So if you double click on it and you get that message that says there are no available input columns, you probably want to say no and want to drag and connect those with a connector, and then you double click on it. Okay? Now before I get into this, notice down in my connection manager there are no file-based connections. There's only right here this single connection manager, and if we go to the properties of it over here, you can actually see it's a connection manager type of OLADB. So I don't have a file connection manager. So when I double click here, you can see there's nothing in the drop down, so we have to say new. And it decides what's the format of the destination file. I think most of us are going to be working with delimited text files. So I'm going to say delimited, and give it a name. I generally like my name to be something similar to where the file will be located. Customers package.txt. I generally don't have to put too many descriptions. Where do you want it stored? And now at this point I can just copy and paste. Does this look familiar? This is pretty much the same screen we had in the wizard, right? I want the first name to have column names. It's taken what was two screens in the wizard and compressed them into one. How do you want these delimited? Right, delimited with a text qualifier here. In the columns, I want the columns delimited with a comma. You can see it's automatically picked up course ID, instructor, and title. Under advanced, now we get into our data type matching. So you can see that it's chosen the Unicode string. We'll talk about the SSIS data types, DT wide string, DT int, things like that at a later point in the video. You can choose suggest types if you're not sure, and it will read a certain number of rows and suggest those particular columns, those particular types. You can hit preview, and we say, OK. It's not reading it there. Choose your mappings. Notice that this is kind of a drag and drop. You can, if you want to, do this and just drag it yourself. Again, this is a drag and drop type stuff. You could do it over here as well. You could just say title matches up to the destination title. I say OK. The red goes away. My control flow goes. I have two choices. I could execute this individual task, or I could go to the package and execute the package. And it flips me to now the control flow showing the progress of the package, and green is good. Okay, you love to see green. So I'm going to switch back to design mode. It flipped me over to debug mode. You can see that now I'm in the debugger. So I'm going to stop debugging, and now I'm back to my normal, and I could start debugging, which is basically what execute does. It brings me into the debugger. And we can now go to the C drive, and we can see customers package.txt, and it did dump all of our data. So I know you've probably got a ton of questions about this and that, and trust me, we're going to cover them all. I think that it's a good point now for us to actually go on and talk about how to document these packages, how to make them look prettier, how to format these packages, how to annotate things here. Let's do a couple of things to kind of close out this basic first section of creating your packages before we really get into the tasks themselves and managing the packages.